Welcome to the Big Picture Show with your host, Josh Tickell. We are the new media, so don't forget to like and share this podcast. Welcome, everybody, to the Big Picture Show. It's been a unseasonably warm week in Ojai, California. Here we are in November, moving into December, just before Thanksgiving, and weather has been in the 70s and 80s, unseasonably warm. I just watched An Inconvenient Sequel, again, from Al Gore. This movie is a powerful film from a guy who's been on a mission for a long time, and of course it's very Al Gore-centric about his hero's journey, his demise. What I found interesting about the film, though, is when he addresses what happened in Syria, and he attributes the Syrian refugee crisis to global drought that is caused by hotter temperatures, right? So it's a very linear relationship. Here we've got climate change because of CO2, and we've got a hotter area that has created a drought that displaces millions of people. And of course, then you have terrorism and all the rest of it. But what's interesting is Gore gets right up to the point of talking about desertification, which is something we cover in the Kiss the Ground book, in the upcoming Kiss the Ground movie, something I'm going to speak with my guest, Tom Ash, today about. But Gore backs off, meaning he attributes everything that's happening to CO2 in the atmosphere. He never talks about what happens with the soil, or what happens with the plants, or what happens with the local water cycle, and how when you disturb those things, the rainfall changes. And when the rainfall changes, of course, we know we get deserts. That doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure it out. So we're going to talk about cause-effect. We're going to talk about closed-loop cycles here today. And we're going to talk about things that spiral downward and upward. How can we create spirals of water that heal the land? And what happens when we create a downward spiral, a system in disintegration that self-reinforces, okay? There's a piece of news that relates to this today out on Medium. It is about Somalia, and it is written by an incredible woman. She's actually a photographer, and her name is Nicole Sobecki, and she spent some time in Somalia making an incredible photo journal of the country, which she compares to a 10,000 photograph treasure trove that they found in an attic in England from an environmental scientist who covered Somalia for generations, for decades. This scientist took photographs of the land, and so she went back and she re-photographed those places. Now, here's what the article said. I encourage you to read it. It's called Capturing Somalia's Climate Calamity. And here we have the quote from Nicole. In just a generation, parts of Somalia went from being semi-arid to desert, pushing one of the world's most resilient communities to the brink. Having spent the last few years documenting this transformation, she really sees that it's very clear. Now she says, and I quote, Most Somalis live and die depending on each year's rainfall. For generations, people have survived extreme conditions relying on tradition and community. A quarter century of civil war has tested those ties. Now, here is the key to today's conversation. I want you to pay extremely close attention, folks who are listening and folks who are watching. Here's what she says. But rain falls less now, and temperatures are rising. With this weather pattern, Somalis will not survive, said Fatima Jibril, an environmental activist. Maybe the land, a piece of desert called Somalia, will exist on the map of the world, but Somalis cannot survive. Okay, we're going to talk about how that relates to our current condition here in California and how this is actually a pattern that is playing out all over the world. And what's important to understand, this is a man-made pattern, but it's not all about CO2. CO2 perhaps plays a role in this, but what we are seeing on the land is largely misunderstood. Be it Somalia, be it Syria, be it California, these are all similar patterns, and they have a similar cause and effect relationship. So pay close attention, because today we're going to talk about that relationship. My guest today is somebody who has been in the water conservation movement for 3 decades, 30 years. Tom Ash is a recognized water conservation specialist, okay? And when we think about conserving water, we think about turning off our taps or taking shorter showers. But there's much more than meets the eye to how to heal the planet's water, both in your town where you live, where it may be getting hotter, just like Ojai, or drier, like our little town in Ojai, or your aquifers may be dropping, like they are here. So welcome to the show, Tom Ash. Thank you so much for joining us. Thanks for being here in Ojai, California today.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Now, you are a water conservation specialist. And as I just said, I think most people think that just means you go around and tell people to turn off their taps. Is that what you do?
30 years ago, it was almost that simple. Be aware of how much water you're using. Take a look and see if you've got leaks. See if there's water running off your property. Your plant materials don't need all this water. You kill more plants with overwatering than you do with underwatering. And it revolved around that. Today, we're so much smarter. I think it just in the recent maybe decade or even less, we've become so much more sophisticated in how we deal with efficiency. So and conservation has the ring to it of taking something away.
Right. It sounds like I have to deprave myself of something.
I don't want to do
right?
that.
I don't want to conserve. I want more.
Now,
right?
Being efficient, who can fault that? Mm-hmm. And so that there's, and I think that's a good change.
Yeah.
For people understanding, because until there's a crisis, unfortunately, or semi-crisis, people don't pay attention because we've done such a great job in this country of creating a plumbing system that we turn on a tap and the water comes out.
I always think it's quite miraculous. In fact, I wonder how long our society would last without running water, hot water, cold water. This is one of the things that distinguished the really great civilizations. Like the Romans had running water. The Moors built a system of aqueducts across southern Spain, northern Africa. These aqueducts, many of them still exist.
Yes.
You can actually take a boat through them in Spain, I understand, and have a tour. So, these were powerful civilizations that relied on the transportation of water from one place to another. What do you think? What do you think about our current situation? Are we, the state of California, are we in a water crisis? And then I want to take it out, to the nation, to the world. But first, I just want to talk about California because, listen, folks, even if you're listening and you're in Finland, here's the deal. California produces the vast majority of the fruits and vegetables in the United States. We're the largest agricultural gross receipts producer in the country, one of the largest agricultural gross receipts producers in the world. So if you eat nuts, you live in America, you eat from California. If you eat dairy, you probably eat from California. In fact, if you eat meat, if you eat strawberries, citrus, many other items, you're eating water that's been transposed into food from our state. So, Tom, do we have a water crisis?
We absolutely do. In this state, about half the water is used in agriculture. The other, a small portion, 10%, goes to urban uses.
I thought you were going to say the other half is used on the lawn that I used to have.
I almost said that, but that would be true. But the perception is that an awful lot of water is used in the urban sector.
Yeah.
By law, about half the water, about 45%, is supposed to stay in the environment.
By law?
By the Clean Water Act.
Okay.
And so that's why California state government is one of the reasons why they're so concerned about how can we manage this system when temperatures are rising, as you pointed out. That's that heat island effect or climate change. Yeah. And we are sucking our aquifers dry, and we're in the midst of all that. we're creating our own heat islands, man-produced. We might take out an orange grove, like here in Ojai,
Yeah.
because there was water conservation regulations in the 5-year drought.
Right.
Well, that immediately causes a heat island, and there's no transpiration going up into the atmosphere. When there's no transpiration and heat, that drives rain clouds away. So Ojai and many places in California have the same scenario happening over and over again. And so that desertification is at play right here, as it is in other places in the world. So yes, California has a water supply problem. We have twice as many people as we had 25 when I started. We have probably twice the agriculture than as when I started.
So we've doubled the population. We've doubled the amount of food that we're growing. But, for all intents and purposes, I can go into my house, turn on the tap. I can use as much as I want. Now, recently, I've gotten some very hefty bills for using as much as I want. But a growing family and a 5-acre avocado orchard, you really start to see where your water is used.
Yep.
It does seem, aside from the fact that we're paying more for water, from a consumer standpoint, it's endless. But is it endless?
Well, as climate changes, that water falls in different places, not necessarily where the people are. For about for 150 years, or when California became a state, till about 2000, it had been a wet period. And we can have wet and dry periods, throughout eons. But we built our water systems and our beliefs around a wet period. So as climate change was being recognized and measured, temperatures up, rainfall down, longer droughts, heavier rain or snow when it happens.
Right.
Those extremes.
Yeah.
We have to learn to deal with that because our system wasn't set for that. In California, the system was set for what we were used to, and what we were used to was heavy snowfall that would melt slowly.
Right.
And then we could use that water in the summertime when we needed it.
So it's a they talk about time shifting, and mostly that's used in the electricity industry. Can we produce electricity during the day and use it at night? You time shift something. We really have a time shifting system for water in the state. It comes in big deluges in the winter, and then we need to use it in the summer.
So storage is a problem.
Storage.
You can't store all of it.
Right.
So I think one of the newest and most potentially phenomenal findings from science and scientists that have done this is we need to rebuild the small water cycle. When that rain falls, no matter what time it is, and whether it's hard or soft, we need to store as much of that water as we can into the land, into the soil. That's great for plant materials. I'm a horticulturist. Obviously, you need water. And let those plant materials thrive. That's the first step, just slowing that water down and percolating it in to rebuilding that small water cycle. Here's a contrast. The big water cycle is the Pacific Ocean. The oceans.
Right.
On Earth.
This is the one we learned in school, right?
Exactly.
The oceans get heated by the sun, and that creates clouds.
That evaporation
Right.
and clouds. And
Clouds make rain, and that's how it all works.
That's
very
cycle.
simple, right? It's kind of like the food pyramid. These were like almost mythological ideas that we were given in school. This is how you eat. This is how rain comes. And now we're, 10, 20 years later, we're going, who made this stuff up? This has only partially to do with reality.
And that's what I think is exciting.
Yeah.
Is that we really are breaking down all those old myths, but now we've got to rebuild. And the new ideas and the new science, can we do it fast enough? Can we do it? And there's a lot of people who don't believe necessarily that we need to do this, whether it's little Ojai or part of the state of California or wherever it might be. But it's clear to me after 3 decades of this that we've got to change, and we can't be afraid of that change because what we're doing now isn't working well.
Yeah.
and it's helping to exacerbate the problem.
So I want to continue that line of thought, but I want to take a step back for folks who are a little less familiar with some of these concepts and hit on each concept with a little more clarity. The first thing you talked about was the heat island effect. So, I want you to explain that a little more for folks. But even folks who are familiar with heat islands, they look at a city and they go, well, that's a heat island right there. That city is just baking in the sun. It's getting hotter. And the more sun that, bakes that city, obviously the sidewalks get hot. That reflects heat up into the near atmosphere. That's a pretty obvious heat island. Tell me about the heat island effect and the less obvious heat islands, the ones that we don't always associate because we're in urban environments primarily. Probably most folks who are watching this, you're in an urban environment. If you're listening to this, you're probably driving in your car. You're probably, on the subway listening to this podcast or something. You're probably in an urban environment. What about the non-urban environments, Tom?
So I'll give an example that I just saw firsthand a few weeks ago. I was driving through the Sierra Nevada mountains to a conference that I was speaking at, and I saw the rimfire impact. It was 280,000 acres burned in 2014 in the Sierra Nevada mountains, much of it around Yosemite National Park, and people have visited Yosemite many times.
How big was the area burned?
280,000 acres.
That's a colossal amount of land.
I couldn't believe it because it would stretch from one mountain to the next mountain to the next mountain, down through the valleys up to the next mountain.
Wow.
I was stunned.
Yeah.
And I'm a student of this. I'm a horticulturist. I'm aware of the of various problems we have in our mountains.
Yeah.
Bark beetles, because of the drought and because of stress of the trees, I could not tell the difference at some points between the bark beetle damage or fire. Needless to say, it's extensive.
Yeah.
But what used to be verdant forest is now looks like a nuclear bomb went off.
Just dead. Stripped. Dead. Burnt.
And in 3 years, maybe a little scrub is coming back. That now, in the summertime, becomes a heat island because there's no transpiration, no water that's cooling. All of our air conditioning units are built on water. A swamp cooler, turning on the air conditioning in our car, it's all built around water. Water cools the air for us. There is no cooling where there is no plant materials.
There is no cooling where there's no plant materials. So this 280,000, now, devil's advocate, somebody could say, well, but nature has fires because in the natural system, ecosystem, nature has to cleanse. It's part of the process. Wildfires, it's normal, right?
Absolutely.
So what do you say to that? Because, maybe those 280,000 acres were just nature's way of saying, oh, need to clear some brush to get some new stuff growing.
Absolutely. Those fires were started by lightning strikes, and that's just part of nature.
Yeah.
Nature didn't build roads, cities, and make cement. And we have paved much of our land in California.
Yeah.
So when you add that new heat island to the existing heat islands and the increase of man's activities.
Yeah.
And listen, I'm just as much of a user as those things as necessary. This pair of jeans I have on took 1,800 gallons of water to make.
Right.
A computer chip takes 10 gallons. A computer takes 100 gallons to make. So we use these resources.
Right. Who knew? I mean, your iPhone that you're watching this on, that probably took, at least 100 gallons of water.
Probably took 100 gallons of water
Shocking.
somewhere in the world, wherever that was made.
Yeah.
So it's more of living within a balance and trying to make sure that we are, we can use those resources, but we have to help make sure that those resources can be sustainable. And when we cut a grove of orange trees down because there was a drought in Southern California, that soil now becomes dusty and hot. And there's no moisture going up into the air to help replenish and actually change the local climate, the local weather,
Yes.
to where clouds will be attracted and precipitation will fall.
Yeah. And this is a big concept that we missed in school. I certainly missed it in school. It wasn't in my public education system.
It was not.
But you're talking about something called transpiration. So let's break that down. Because now I think we know what a heat island is. Heat island can be natural. It can be man-made. It can be in the city. It can be in a rural area. It can be in the countryside. It is a place where there is no vegetation or none to speak of, or very little. So now we know what a heat island is. Let's talk about transpiration.
So that is the process that made life on this planet possible. Sorry to go back that far. I'm old, but maybe not quite that old. And you mentioned CO2. So here's, in a hopefully a simplified way, there's CO2 in the atmosphere. Plant materials, any kind of plant materials, pull in CO2. It goes down through their vascular system, whether you're a 300-foot tall sequoia or grass 3 inches high, down into the root system. The root system of plants then store that carbon, and fungi and bacteria in the soil actually take and use that CO2 for their purposes. That's carbon. Carbon in the soil is what fertilizes plant materials. All those forest trees, they don't get fertilizer from the nursery. It's the carbon exchange cycle, and then the result back up the system of the plant materials is transpiration and oxygen that comes out that we breathe. That's why I say transpiration and plant materials are the key to life on the planet. When that happened, how that happened, that made it possible for life to have oxygen.
So plants are pulling in CO2 through photosynthesis. They're releasing oxygen, thankfully, because I personally need a lot of it. And there's something else going on. In the process, this transpiration, what's happening with the water?
The water goes back into that cycle, whether you want to call it the big water cycle or the small water cycle. That's that sustainable loop that continues to allow water or rainfall or snow to fall because it's being recycled, essentially.
And give me an example of transpiration. I mean, I think a lot of people, even if you live in a city, you've gone to like if you live in New York, you've gone to City Park, right? If you live in LA, maybe you've gone for a hike up in Topanga or one of the canyons. Give me an example of how can people connect the concept with what they have experienced personally.
When it's hot outside and you're hiking or you're walking or you're in the park, you go sit under a tree. That's an air conditioning unit. In our early conservation programs, we were at water agencies, we were trying to connect water and energy together. So we would teach people to plant trees on the south and west side of their homes. So it would shade the homes and they wouldn't need to use as much air conditioning and they could save energy, blah, blah, blah.
Right.
And save money.
Yeah.
So go sit under a tree on a hot day.
Yeah.
There's transpiration. That's an example of transpiration. Feeling it.
Right. And if you're, for example, I've been in New York in the middle of summer, and that is a heat island. It's reflecting off the buildings. You can feel everywhere. You literally feel like you're a bun baking in an oven. But then you go into City Park, and even the non-shaded areas are cooler. So that's the transpiration coming out of the leaves, right? The actual, the water is like sweating out of the trees and the plants and the grass, and it's creating a sort of swamp cooler effect.
So in California, we have spent an awful lot of money, hundreds of millions of dollars, to get people to take grass out. That's been a good thing from a water standpoint, a water conservation standpoint, but it hasn't necessarily been a good thing from a heat island standpoint and kind of interrupting this transpiration cycle. Grass transpires a lot of water. It takes a lot of water and it just keeps growing. And so something we do that we think is good can have this there's the other side of the fence.
Yeah.
So we've got to figure that out a lot better and a lot faster.
Yeah. And that's a big one. Listeners who've been listening for a while know that my wife and I have an ongoing conversation about our lawn. We have planted a multi-species cover crop.
Excellent.
So we've got green fescue, and we've got clover, and we've got all these, Paul Blackthorne, who's an actor who was on the show, defending rhinos and doing wonderful things. He gets off the show, he calls me, send me your Amazon list. I want to buy everything you bought for your lawn, for my lawn. So I sent that to him. But the issue that we have is, okay, great. So we're watering less, but the size of the plants, should be at least 3 or 4 inches. Well, you don't think about it, but most people cut their lawns at like 1 or 2 inches. If you're cutting your lawn at 1 or 2 inches, you're starving the root structure. The root structure can't get deep enough to really get the water that it needs. So you're going to end up watering more. So my wife likes a shorter lawn. I like it long and shaggy because, and so herein goes the endless conversation of, can't we have a long lawn? Then we don't have to water it as much. No, I want it shorter. I don't want snakes. And, so there you go. That's a domestic battle that is literally changing the future of water in California.
And I think it happens in many more homes than yours.
Yes. And look, this is not a big issue. It's not a stake between my wife and I, but it's an ongoing conversation that we have, how to do this in a way that's good for everyone.
Farmers are having these kinds of conversations, similar kind of dilemmas.
Yeah.
How do we do this?
Yeah.
The landscape industry has changed dramatically from turf orientation to low water use plant materials. So it's a change, and change doesn't happen quickly. But as Einstein said, we need to think differently, because how we thought before that got us into this dilemma can't be the same kind of thinking that we use to get out of this dilemma.
Right. Yeah. Steve Jobs used to say think different before.
That's right.
Before everyone had Apple everything, and now it's not so different anymore. But how do we get out of this? If 50% of our water is used for agriculture, we got to eat. Don't have a choice there. 50% is mandated to be, or
40%.
40% is mandated to stay in the environment. Well, it seems like there's just no way out of this.
Our engineering mentality has tended to take rainfall or snow that falls on our state or on any land away as fast as possible.
Get it off the land. Drain it, put ditches.
Flood control channels.
Yeah.
Let's not have these problems.
Right.
That's how the LA River happened.
Right.
The cement walls of the LA River is some people started to build their homes down in the river basin, and a heavy rain would come, and lo and behold, they'd be washed out to sea.
Yeah.
So Army Corps of Engineers says, well, we can figure this out, and they did what they did. Now there's a lot of movement, but it's very expensive now to undo that problem. So up in the Sierra Nevada mountains, or Ojai with the mountains that surround, or San Diego County, or any place in the country or around the world, if we start being, for lack of a better word image, beavers, and building natural structures that can slow that water down, and let it get into the soil.
Right.
Now we've got that exchange that can start to build back again and regenerate soils and keep those soils moist.
Yes.
Happening all over.
So
it can happen anywhere.
Maybe we need a T-shirt campaign, something like, I am a beaver. You don't want to misprint. You don't want to accidentally.
That's right.
No, let's not go there. So being beavers is about building water reserves, water reservoirs.
On a small scale.
On a small scale. On a small scale. What about when we look at, how we do agriculture? Because this is such a big issue, and what I tell people is we don't realize what's going on in growing our food because we drive by it. But if you park your car, you stop, you get out, you go into the field, you look down, put your hand down, put it in the dirt, soil, you're going to know immediately if that's rich soil or if that's dry dust. And having driven off of I-5 and driven into that great central valley where there is really a lack of transpiration going on, It's dusty, Tom. It's dusty out there. It's dust. There's no soil to speak of. It's one big dust bowl.
Because we've altered the water cycle all up and down that valley. What used to run out of the mountains would go into the aquifer.
Yeah.
And that aquifer was fairly high, literally not far below the surface.
Right.
But we've over-pumped that water for agriculture. There's nothing on the surface, so around those crops is a heat island that we talked about earlier.
Yeah, big one. I mean,
big.
California's Central Valley is bigger than most states.
The Dust Bowl of the 30s was partially because of drought. We had 5 or 6 year drought then.
Yeah.
But it was our soil management practices that created the Dust Bowl. And the topsoil and the good soil went away.
Yeah.
Gone. The replacement was a mechanized method to grow more food. And farmers are, by and large, very smart and very good businessmen. And there's been innovations around the world on drip irrigation out of Israel and so forth and so on that enable us to know exactly how much transpiration those plants have and how much water to put back in.
Yeah.
We don't necessarily always follow those things because the economics of water keeps water cheap. And people demand cheap food and so there's a bit of a bureaucratic rub or a practical rub there somewhere. I'm not quite sure what the term would be.
Yeah.
That hurts our ability to do things in a sustainable way. I was almost going to say the right way or the nature way, the natural way.
Right.
Or in a sustainable way.
Yeah.
Where we're putting organic materials back onto those soils. We're eliminating the chemicals from those soils. Those chemicals that we put on crops and fertilizers or lawns destroy the bacteria and the fungi in the soil. Kills them.
Right.
Be like jumping in a bed of salt, for you and I.
Yeah.
So without that ecosystem of the soil, which, by the way, is the largest potential carbon storage on the planet.
Yeah.
And we're not using it like that.
Right.
Because we've made it hydrophobic by not planting, not allowing the natural vegetation to grow and have that impact, or cutting the lawn and having very short roots.
Yeah. Amazing. And so, primary example here in Ojai, there's a big push to get rid of this bamboo-like plant called arundo. And so we've done, some local community meetings, and the question is, well, why are we trying to get rid of this stuff? It does stabilize soil. It grows, obviously, like a weed. Well, the main answer that everybody comes back with is too much transpiration, meaning it's sucking too much water out of the ground and putting too much of it in the air, and we can measure that. And, of course, if we let it go wild, it'll suck all the water. And you go, wait up. We grow a lot of oranges and pixies and avocados. And I run a 5-acre organic avocado ranch here. It is ridiculous. The recommended from the California avocado, 2 million gallons a year. 2 million gallons a year on 5 acres. That's insanity. Now, no one's coming over here and saying, oh, you got to chop down your avocados because they're transpiring too much. But if you look at it, what in the world possessed somebody to plant avocados in a desert? That is insanity. That is going to require way more water than it's going to replenish back into the soil. So, herein lies the bigger question is, should we be thinking in terms of, because the new movement now is resilience. We've got to become climate resilient. It's what the politicians say. So should we be thinking about more resilient crops even?
Absolutely. We should. The University of California is constantly working on new varieties of crops that use less water, or that can take more brackish water or saltish water, or grass that can take more salt, higher salt water, higher TDS, we call it, total dissolved solids. On the arundo versus avocado question, we don't eat arundo. It's not a native plant that has a value to the native wildlife.
Yes.
In my world of horticulture,
Yeah.
grass, turf grass, is the highest water using plant. And so when we put weather stations in to measure the evapotranspiration rate, that amount of water that moves through grass is used as the standard. It's called evapotranspiration rate. And it's to say it's 100%.
So 100% of the water that's going in is
Yeah,
more or less.
It's the standard, number.
Right.
So if here in the valley, I think it's about 48 inches per year of evapotranspiration. That arundo, being 10 feet high,
Yeah.
and being a water-sucking plant, that's why it grows in the riverbeds and so forth.
Yeah.
It's using 100% of ET, but it might be more than turf grass.
Wow. Wow.
And again, it has no wildlife value. It has no food value.
Yeah.
It's sucking water out of the ground that we could grow food with or have for
A
health
shower.
and safety.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So
I was thinking more personally, just a shower.
there you go. Avocados are fairly high
Yeah.
in their evapotranspiration.
Yes.
We've measured it. It's about 85% of ET.
Okay.
And we actually get something that's extremely healthy from that.
Yes.
So I would say the trade-off would be I'd much rather have more avocado than arundo.
I would prefer to eat an avocado than a piece of bamboo.
Than a piece of bamboo.
Yes. But it still doesn't solve our water crisis.
So the arundo is taking water out of that groundwater basin that
Yeah.
everybody relies on in this valley and many valleys.
Yeah.
And so, but the problem is it's very expensive to get rid of.
Yeah.
It is a tough plant.
Yeah.
And probably as big an issue as any is not just the water, but to get rid of it takes chemical.
Yeah. Well, that's what we're seeing here. And of course, we know that an ecosystem in distress makes a good home for invasive species. So, then you kill the arundo, and it's a little bit like putting a Band-Aid on a cancer.
Yeah.
Which, look, this is a plant that's causing problems. The push is to get rid of it, so let's get rid of it. But what about the bigger underlying issue? We've got a lot of water going into agriculture. We've got a lot of water going into urban environments. We've got these heat island effects. Let's talk about solutions. How do we turn this ship around? Because as you said, twice as many people, twice as much food production. This just isn't California. We're adding a couple of billion people to the planet by 2050. Those people all need water. They all need to eat.
Yep.
And the UN tells us desertification, number one biggest threat to humanity. Bigger than climate change because it's localized. This is about, land drying out. How do we change it, Tom? How do we fix the situation?
I think water is the biggest potential solution.
Water's the solution.
Water is the solution, not necessarily removing carbon from the air, which replace all the cars and all fossil fuel burning. That would probably be much tougher and much more expensive than literally restoring the water cycles.
Okay.
And let water do what its role is in this natural cycle and plant materials. So I come from a water agency that's very innovative. We're in Southern California, Inland Empire Utility Agency. We help manage the largest groundwater basin in Southern California. And 1 million people live in this area. In a 5-year drought, our aquifer increased by 150,000 acre feet. That's about twice of what your Lake Casitas is right now.
You increased the water in your aquifer. You put more water in than you took out.
And it was because of a portfolio of water supply solutions and efficiencies.
And if people haven't been to the Inland Empire, by the way, Somalia, Inland Empire. Don't mean to offend anybody. It's not a degraded terrorist state, but it is hot.
It's a hot, dry
It
place.
is hot and dry.
Yeah.
So you managed, and how many people are we talking affected by this water?
Approximately 1 million people.
So 1 million people relying on an aquifer. Over the course of how long did it take to put?
From the start of the drought to the end of the drought.
Yeah.
So let's say 5 years.
5 years. And you're putting more water into the aquifer than you're taking out. That is amazing.
But it's because of the planning and the foresight and the understanding that, our climate is changing. We've got to do the kind of things that can add to our water supply and not waste what we have.
Yeah. So give me some examples.
Yep.
What are some of the innovations, the technologies, the efficiencies?
Yep. Recycled water. Let's say that's number one. In a million people, you're going to get a lot of sewage water.
Yeah.
And we take that and we clean it up to such an extent that we're putting it back into the aquifer for future drinking. We put it on our agricultural crops. It's a great resource. That also has a byproduct, a biosolid, that we compost to such a high level that it's exactly what the plant materials need. And we supply that to agricultural farming operations, to parks, to median strips, to schools, so that carbon starts to get put back into the soil and those plant materials have what they need and they don't need the chemicals, because we don't want the chemicals going onto the land, the typical fertilizer chemicals, because that's what kills the soil.
Right.
And that's what gets into our water supply that we have to clean up and spend more money for.
Right.
So
now, a lot of people say, "Ooh, I don't want to eat my own pee," but like this is space age. We're in 2017 here, people. We're going to send people to Mars. Guess what? They're going to be drinking. They're not going to be taking a water supply, right?
the Mississippi River starts at the top of the country
Yeah.
and exits the Gulf of Mexico down to New Orleans.
Yeah.
That water is used a dozen times in a dozen different big cities up and down that river.
Right.
It's the same water, but we're using it over and over again.
So bad news, people. You're already drinking your own pee.
But we can clean it up to where it's so safe.
Right. But let's face it.
yeah.
That's the majority of that's water, and what you're talking about is filtration,
Yeah,
which we do anyway.
We do it anyway.
And then bam, you've got H2O.
So recycled water.
Okay.
Treating the soils right. Getting efficiencies on landscapes
Yes.
and agriculture. Huge.
Yeah.
Our efficiency went way up as that drought started because we asked people to do certain things and we provided funds for them to do things and expertise on how you do these things. And lo and behold, we were fine. We met every drought regulation without missing a beat. People didn't realize how much they could save, and it didn't hurt them a bit.
So low flow toilets, low flow shower heads, all that kind of stuff that we've talked, we've heard about, in PSAs and things like that.
Stormwater capture. We have big programs. The Big Bear and the San Bernardino Mountains are on our northern edge of the Inland Empire, and so we capture as much of that water as we can at the moment, and we're going to get better at it.
Yeah.
So that it doesn't run off downstream. But we also have to be cognizant of the water that runs in that watershed. That watershed runs from the San Bernardino Mountains or Big Bear down to Newport Beach. So we can't just keep all the water for ourselves.
You can't just capture it all, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we have to work collaboratively with other areas so that we mesh together our best ideas and our best knowledge and funds to be able to balance this whole system. Arundo is one of those things that happens throughout every river in Southern California.
Right.
And so we've had Arundo removal programs for years.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's all about returning the water back into the cycle.
Yes.
It's not about how much can you suck out of the cycle. It's literally, can you work inside the cycle? Because as you said, water is life. It's reusable. And that's the amazing thing about it. Water is one of the few truly recyclable, like 100% recyclable commodities. That's powerful. That's powerful. And so when you look around the world and you see, the news of what's happening, especially across the African continent, but we see it as well in Australia. And, funny enough, we're seeing desertification inside heavily forested areas. Just look at Sao Paulo, Brazil. This is a city that literally ran out of water. And you think, how's that possible? They're in a rainforest down there. But yet desertification can happen anywhere, right?
The land is sinking in Beijing, China, because they're overdrafting the groundwater basin. We have...
So literally like a straw sucking it out of the groundwater, and you're sitting on the top of that glass and the water's just going down.
Water helps hold the land up.
Yes.
Central Valley, same problem, because we're sucking so much water out that the land is sinking.
Yeah.
So that's a problem with this overdrafting, and where efficiency of using water for agriculture, capturing water and not letting it run off, not wasting water for sure. But I'm not so sure that we're doing as good a job as we can do on not wasting water.
Yeah.
Because it's been such an easy thing for us to have
Yeah.
that the average person, in 30 years of conservation, I've never heard or met anyone that says, I'm going to get up and see how much water I can waste today.
Yeah.
Everybody thinks they're efficient.
Right.
Everybody.
Right.
And it's only when you start using the science that we have, and that science generally revolves around what we call a water budget. Well, you've got a family of 4, and you've got a certain size lot, and you live in this area, and the evapotranspiration is such.
Yeah.
Here's how much water you need.
Yeah.
I won't say should use.
Right.
You can use more, and
Right.
you'll pay more.
Right.
But what do you need? And I think that's needs to be something that we become really aware of.
Yeah.
Just like we get up and we see what the temperature is, or
Right.
is there, what's the freeways? Are they packed today? We should be able to get on our phone and say, what's the evapotranspiration rate today, and how much should I water?
I would love that. I'd love an app for my phone that connects to the plumbing in my house, not to control that plumbing, just to measure it. Look at that. Look who's taking a shower. I just see that dial going up. Like a dashboard for my house.
And there are companies, particularly in California, because
Yeah.
we've had the most serious water shortage type problems, and we have those people,
Yeah.
and we've got some tremendous innovation out of Silicon Valley and other places. There are companies that have devices that can clamp onto your pipes in the house and let you know if you have a leak, and text you or email you. So there are those technologies,
Okay.
and
I'll look
I would
into
say
that.
these are within the last 5 years.
Yeah,
So
I'll look into that. That's super cool.
our learning curve has gone up, and then the technologies follow.
Yeah. I want to take a step back and kind of speak philosophically. You've worked with water for 30 years, and you've probably seen a lot of different types of water. You've probably, seen all the aqueducts that supply the agriculture of California. You've gone out to the ocean. You probably think about water different than the average person. When you see water coming out of a tap, what does Tom Ash think? What goes through your mind after 30 years of working diligently to try and conserve that resource?
Well, I thought I was good, and I learned from a phone call into a water agency something completely different that changed my mind. A couple called and they said, we don't understand anything on our water bill. We couldn't possibly use this much water. And oh, by the way, water should be free anyway. Falls out of the sky. And I was forwarded this call because the customer service people didn't quite know what to do with this, so they sent it to me. And
You're that guy.
I'm that
who
guy.
gets those calls.
Those calls.
Oh boy.
And I thought for a second. I said, I agree with you. Well, so I disarmed them a little bit because they were ready for a knockdown, drag out with government. They're calling their local government agency and complaining about their bill. I said, but let me tell you what we really do. And I explained to them that this particular agency brings water from hundreds of miles away. That obviously takes a lot of infrastructure. We put it into a big reservoir, and then we take that water out. We clean it up, a treatment plant first. We then put it in a reservoir in your local neighborhood. And with all these pipes running underground that you don't see, and by the way, you see the power lines, so people have more of a knowledge about energy. Well, my energy bill, I get that.
Yeah.
Water you don't see.
Yeah.
And I said, I don't know why I said this. It just popped in my head. I said, do you have a cell phone, Mr. and Mrs. Smith? And they said, of course we do, you smart aleck. And I said, hey, do you ever have dropped calls? Well, yeah, it happens all the time. Huh. Have you ever turned on the tap and never had water run out? And there was obviously silence up there on the phone. They said, okay, yeah, you got me. No. I said, well, for us to do that, all that I just described to you, costs you about $2 a day. And if you can find water cheaper than that and go drive and get it, and you think that's cheaper, please let me know. I want to go get some of that water.
Right.
And
you buy a bottle of water at the airport, it'll run you $10.
And the water you think should be free is almost free. I mean, efficiently used water is almost free. It's about 0.3 of a penny per gallon.
Yeah.
So we've really not told people the right story for them to appreciate really what it takes to get water from one place to another. I mean, people live in Southern California because of the weather. We grow crops because of the weather.
Right.
But we don't have the water resources.
Yeah.
for all those people and all those crops. So we do have to, we've had to import it if you want to. I don't know if we have to, but we do.
We do import
That
it.
is a system, and we do support, to your point early on, was we support much of the world with food. Great. Okay. So if people really understood what it took to get there, I think that would change their relationship with water.
Yeah.
And people are starting to talk about, there was a tremendous book by an author named Charles Fishman called The Big Thirst. And it was one of the books that changed my mentality about water and the relationship to water. And now I've added to that, surprisingly, as a horticulturist, I thought I knew everything about plants and soil. The new knowledge about the soil and its impact on, not just impact, it's the key
Yeah.
to keeping the system functioning.
Yeah.
So when you have an appreciation of something, water, and you have a system that's functioning, you got it. So we got to somehow mesh these things together and use our scientific knowledge and a philosophy of, this is really important. this is it.
Yeah.
We don't have this, we're gone.
Yeah. Water is life, right?
Water's life.
It's the primary.
And water
liquid.
agencies have 5th grade and 6th grade little programs every year, and they give awards for posters that are, water is life posters. And so we try to get it into the heads, but I'm not sure it's gotten there.
Yeah.
So when people say, geez, you've been in this for a long time, I go, yeah, I've largely failed because people don't know what it takes or how much water they should use. I gave a little TED talk one place, and there was a lot of smart people in the audience, and I asked them first off, because they could see the bio and say, 30 years in water conservation. I said, how many of you know how much water you used today? There are PhDs, not one hand went up.
Yeah.
I said, okay, well, let me try this. How much water should you use in a day? Not one hand went up. And I said, well, then I've largely failed. So I think the economics have to change a little bit to get people's attention.
Yeah.
I think we have to tell the right stories and be very transparent and open about what's happening. Because right now, we just sort of, if things are working right, we don't really ask any questions.
Right. Yeah. We all love the miracle of electricity. We love the miracle of fuel. We love the miracle of stuff coming out of the tap that we can just, wash our food with, drink, shower in, bathe in. But it really is a very delicate balance, isn't it? And ever more delicate as population increases. So this is an issue we're going to be tracking on the show. We're going to be doing more about the connection between water, soil, climate, health, food, all connected. You can't really separate these issues out. What about Ojai? What do you do here? Is there any hope for our small town? We seem to use an exponentially larger amount of water than we should. What do you think about Ojai, Tom?
About a year and 3/4. So spring of 2016, I was asked to give a talk here in Ojai. About 50 people showed up, and I did my research, and I called the water people and water officials in town. And I came to the pretty quick conclusion, and this was at the height of the drought, and there were 30% drought restrictions, and people were obviously aware of the drought and being asked to cut back severely. And I said, you have a problem. We have climate that's changing. Here's what's happening. Here's why you did not get rainfall in an El Nino year, which you thought you were going to get. And you're off the grid of water. In other words, you don't get any imported water. You're on your own. So you need to collaborate. You need to go after grants that are absolutely available all over the state, and that's what I'm trying to help with in the community now with is I've connected them with some state people and some people that do a lot of grant writing to do the kind of projects where you recycle more water, you collect water off of roofs, you do small water capture systems.
So gray water system,
everything.
Everything that you saw that worked when you recharged your aquifer for those million people, all of those things could work here in our little desert town. It's kind of like Mad Max out here. We're literally off the grid,
You are off the grid.
Yeah.
You are a tremendous agricultural valley.
Yeah.
And that you're small enough and you actually have all the elements for success. An intelligent community, agriculture that is a viable part of your economy.
Yeah.
You've got water in the hills that's been there it's called primary water. That's another
That's the
segment.
ancient water. We could talk about that all day, right?
We could. And,
yeah.
and I've got some pictures for you out in the East End that can show you some of that water.
Yeah.
You need to do everything.
Yeah.
But you're also a small community that doesn't have a lot of people. So you really got to put your heads together and get the right people that can help create write the grant applications, because the state of California is looking out in the future and knowing that they do not have the water that's going to fulfill all of our needs. And so they need local areas to do as well as they can.
Right.
And you've got an opportunity. You can change the local weather with a small water cycle. So we come back full circle to what I first sort of talked about, because I'm so excited about it.
Yeah.
Because it's probably the single solution. The others are small portfolio of techniques that you need to do just because. You have every opportunity to do that here in Ojai, and I think have a verdant valley again.
Yeah. Well, we've seen it done.
Yes.
We know it's possible. I mean, prime example is the Loess Plateau in China, area the size of France. It was dry, rocky, dusty. In 2 decades, they turned it into literally a green forest. So if they can do it in China with no Wi-Fi, this was primitive stuff back in the 80s they did this. So you'd think that we can do it here.
You can do it here.
Yeah.
Changing attitudes, you were talking about philosophies,
right,
is the hardest part.
Yes.
It's not applying for the grants. It's not doing the projects.
Yeah.
It's getting people who have the decision-making abilities to actually say yes.
It's all about the gray matter at the end of the day, shifting that big mass between our ears. Tom, we've run out of time, but I just want to mention to our viewers and our listeners, great PDF online, Water for the Recovery of the Climate, a New Water Paradigm. Water for the Recovery of the Climate, a New Water Paradigm. That is a free PDF written by some very smart gentlemen. Actually, Czech
Republic.
Czech Republic, right? So check that out. Get that. It's free. Just download it. Costs you nothing. Fascinating read. Will totally open your eyes. Of course, we covered the same issues in the Kiss the Ground book. And Tom, I want to thank you for coming, being on the show, taking a little time with us today. Eye-opening conversation, really.
I am thrilled because you were able to put together a lot of pieces in that book that blew me away, and I couldn't put it down. So
yes,
there you go.
There's your endorsement, ladies and gentlemen. Listen, folks, thanks for tuning in today. And those of you who are listening on iTunes through some podcast medium, if you don't love the show, you don't have to rate it. But if you love this show, give us a 5-star rating. That is like oxygen. Thank you so much for tuning in today to the Big Picture Show. Can't wait to see you next week, Thursdays at 2 p.m. We're always live on Facebook. Love you guys. Signing off. Welcome to the Big Picture Show with your host, Josh Tickell. We are the new media, so don't forget to like and share this podcast.